A new combatant rises up from the swamps. Here's your look at the new Hiya toys. This is the DC Injustice 2 Swamp Thing. Exquisite Mini is a new standard series set for 1/18th scale, featuring super articulation action figures from the folks over at Hiya Toys. Now, you know, before we get this review underway, we're going to figure out how tall the Exquisite Mini of Injustice 2 Swamp Thing is. I'm taking the tape measure right to the very top of its head. Fairly tall figure. I know it seems small, but for a standard 3 3/4 inch figure, he's actually a little bit taller than most. He's 4.8 inches in height. And switching that over to centimeters, you're looking at a figure standing 12.2 centimeters tall. Let's get a gander at Swamp Thing's accessories. The first thing we'll have a look at is the metallic purple display stand that comes included with the figure. In fact, actually, it's the exact same display stand that we've gotten with all the Injustice figures that Hiya Toys have produced. The neat thing about these display stands, as you've probably already seen enough on this channel, is that they all connect to one another. See underneath you'll see these little slots. There's one there, one there, one there, one there. Well, you get the idea. They're there and they're there as well. Included along with these display stands, you get these little T-shaped connector points. You'll have to, of course, for the time being, imagine this, if you will. You use your imagination because we don't have a secondary stand present at the time. But you just put the T-stands in between. You connect the other secondary base, or third base, or fourth base, until eventually you're expanding this out. And really, in theory, you could just continue to expand these out until you have an extremely large diorama display base, or at least like a display stand in which all the figures can stand on top of. Now, there is luckily at least a peg point right there. It's a little harder to make out. It's right there. And you can also take the figure's feet, which has 2 supplied peg holes on the underside, and you can connect the figure to the display base. I personally like this because if you want to get Swamp Thing into a bit of a dynamic pose, simply instead of just having him standing straight, you can pull that off with the display stand. And I always appreciate when companies include display stands because you get a little bit more creative with what you can do with the figure. Speaking of what you can also do with the figure, get him to stand properly, he comes included with this, a vine weapon, a melee weapon he could use during battle. I can't help but think, though, looking at it, it kind of reminds me of a question mark, something which Riddler would have had. It kind of looks like a cross between a Riddler weapon and even a Poison Ivy weapon, but at least the coloring is consistent with Swamp Thing. The browns and the greens kind of melded together, giving us a nice contrast of colors. And I like that the base is more of a root, as if he's pulled this out of the ground and now using this, like I said, as a weapon. You can attach it to either one of his hands. It doesn't really matter specifically which hand you want to go with. Just attach it in between his grip, his 4 fingers and thumb making up his grip. And now you've got Swamp Thing with a weapon. Always like that. Always like included accessories. Even if I don't plan on ever using the accessory, in this case I would, I like the fact that companies always include weapons. To not have an included accessory with these figures, especially for the fact that they are slightly smaller figures, that's a little sad. It's a bit sad. The other thing that he comes included with as well, not as interesting in contrast to the other things that we've had a look at. Oh, he just fell down. He also comes with a pair of closed fists. Not really too much that you can do with the closed fists, but I guess if you don't want to have him displayed with the weapon and maybe just have his fists up for battle, you can give him a swap out of hands. Let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. We'll just unpeg this. We'll find the provided hand. Of course, thumbsies go in, and we're just going to attach that in place. There we go. And now he has a closed fist. Again, it's something that you can do with the figure, playing it out with the fact that you can mix and match it, get the desired look that you want. You could even maybe go with a fist on one hand and then have him holding his melee weapon with the other hand. It's entirely up to you. So let's have a look at the new Injustice 2 Swamp Thing. I am quite smitten by this figure. Hiya Toys for the longest time have been producing 3 3/4-inch figures of the realms of, say, Predators, Aliens, and in now recent memory, they've also, of course, now started doing the superhero figures from Injustice 2. And by the way, actually, while we're at it, I just so happened to have a couple of these figures sitting idly by, almost as if I had planned all of this. Just got a couple of size comparisons. Not that you would want to put the two combatants together, but there he is next to one of the Predator figures that Hiya Toys have also produced. Just get him to stand properly. Again, and again. If you have problems with the figures standing, you can always use the display stand, because again, most of these do have peg holes on the undersides of their feet. For some strange reason, I'm just having a tough time getting the Predator to stand. I probably would want to make use of a display stand. And then the other one we have just recently, not too recently, but fairly recently ago, we also had a look at the Alien Xenomorphs, also from the folks over at Hiya Toys. We can actually bend the tail on this one to help aid with getting this one to stand upright. Just again, show you guys some size comparisons between this one and some of the other things that Hiya Toys have produced. And just can't get the Predator to stand. It's always the case when you want to get these guys showcased. Anyways, there's the 3 figures. There's a couple of examples there for some comparisons for you. Go ahead and remove those. Just put those to the side. Certainly full reviews of those you guys can check out on this channel if you wanted to have a look at them. But of course, the focus on this review is one of Swamp Thing. Now, I don't know if you know this. If you talk around to other people, you probably will hear this yourself in rumblings, but I am such a big fan of Swamp Thing. Always been a huge fan of the look of the character. Of course, his various different appearances, the 2 films of, I guess, the 80s or so, the cartoon, that really spawned, if anything, no pun intended, my interest and love for Swamp Thing. So anytime there's a new Swamp Thing figure, you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to want to get a hand of that, get that in hand. And having now look at Swamp Thing, I gotta say, he delivers. He does deliver quite nicely. Slightly a bit of a different take of Swamp Thing than what we would normally see. Things like these giant mushroom-capped shoulder plates aren't something you normally expect to find with Swampy here, but everything else kind of comes together in a way that you would expect Swamp Thing to have. A mixture of moss, roots, and different vegetation, I suppose, all growing together to form Swamp Thing here. His face sculpt is actually quite good. Even with the trademark little dots for his nose and that kind of upside down, it's kind of like a triangle mouth that you right away know that Swamp Thing, Swamp Thing generally has that, and I'm glad this one also has that in the design as well. He's really a well-crafted, well-sculpted looking figure. Most of his colors are the greens and the browns. You can see it right there. But even like the browns are different variations. For example, like I said, we've already talked about the caps here. The shoulder plates on his torso are a different color than the darker rooted sections of his mid-torso and down on his legs. What I really like is these additional kind of bark pieces that are on his lower legs. They're not quite symmetrical to one another. They do vary a little bit. I also like that these got little spikes and just protrusions sticking out from the legs. Just gives them something a little bit extra. It's a little bit more for your eyes to feast on. Coloring on this guy is really quite good. Sculpting is good, and equally so, paint really delivers all of those sculpts and brings them to the forefront. You can even see how they've added what looks to be a darker wash, just kind of slapped across the figure's plastic here, so it fills in all of those crevices and creases, so that you can see all the indentations and all the stuff that's a little bit more recessed on the sculpt shows out and stands out, I should say. You've got a lot of the rooted systems weaving their way in and out of the forearms and of the bicep area as well. There's really, again, a lot to look at on this guy. I would not even say necessarily being biased for the fact that Swamp Thing is one of my favorite superheroes of the DC universe. But, I mean, certainly as well, just even like looking at a figure like this, you can almost get a new appreciation for the level of sculpting and just intricacies, these little tiny intricacies, like even if I move the arms out of the way here, just get a gander at all those roots. That's just fantastic sculpting from Hiya Toys. Everything comes together quite nicely. Also like the bit of the sheen. I don't know if you can see it, but the light's reflecting a little bit off of the plastic, kind of giving a more of a muckier, slicked, almost wetter look than perhaps some of the other figures that we had a look at before. There's really a lot to enjoy on this particular figure. Okay, so let's have a look at this guy's posability. So his head rotates all the way around. These are standard articulated figures. On all the Hiya toys, they're generally about the same level of articulation. The torso does have a ball joint. Seems to move up easier than it does left and right. Seems to want to like kind of get stuck on stuff, and it doesn't really want to allow you to move the torso too much back and forth. However, you can considerably move it up and down, so I like that. The shoulders move out. It appears that the plates here of the armor are of a softer plastic, and they're actually attached here rather than on the shoulders. So when you are moving the arms, the shoulder pads, if you want to call them shoulder pads, are permanently affixed up here. So it does still allow you to move the arms back and forth, and being that there's slightly softer plastic, doesn't mean that the shoulders get in the way of things, so I like that. Like I said, the arms move out, they move forward and back. There's a bend at the elbow, and the elbow also allows for articulation in the forearm. The hands rotate. There's a ball joint attaching the hands. We've already looked at that. When we swapped out this hand for this hand, I almost said swamped out for this one to this one here. He doesn't have any ab crunch or ab articulation, but he does have a ball hinge joint, or ball joint right there, as you can see on the inside, which allow the legs to move forward, which allow the legs to move back, which also allow the legs to move out considerably, as you can see that far out. He has a double hinge on the knee, nothing it seems in the lower calf area, and his feet rotate all the way around, hinge up and down, and you've also got a mild ankle pivot, not too much though. What's there to say about Swamp Thing that I haven't already said? Really nice job, nice outing from the folks over at Hiya Toys. Personally speaking, I love the fact that Hiya Toys are producing 3 3/4 inch figures. This is sort of a market that was an abundance back in the day. A lot of companies were producing smaller scale figures. That simply, it just seems like that has dropped off. Hiya Toys is one of the few that are putting out high quality, crafted, well sculpted 3 3/4 inch scale figures, even though technically Swamp Thing's a little bit taller than 3 3/4 inches. Yeah, so Swamp Thing does have a lot of cool things going for him. A really neat looking sculpt, and equally so paint that doesn't let the sculpt down. It really does showcase all the roots and all the cool little nooks and crannies that are on the figure itself. Even though the figure is only just brown and green, the moss green does a great job of popping the brown colors of the roots, like I said, that are crafted very intricately into his body. I like the fact that he also does come with that melee rooted weapon. Yeah, it does look a little bit like a question mark, but it does the job, and it does the job quite well. Speaking of doing the job and doing the job quite well, I like the fact that they do give them the metallic purple display stands. Still, though, one gripe that I made in the previous reviews, I believe it was even the Superman and the Batman reviews, was with these Injustice League figures, and I think really just across the board, where they put the peg on the display stand, I wish they could actually move that a little bit more further forward or a little bit further over. The end result, though, is unless you're displaying the figure standing straight up in a museum pose, if you plan on putting him in any bit of a dynamic pose, what ends up happening is probably what you can see here in final looks. His leg drapes off, falls off, and in some cases just doesn't reach the rectangular shape of the display stand. I kind of wish that they could have put a couple more pegs on the stand. I know that's such a small gripe, and that really speaks to the volume of this figure, when my only gripe is really the display stand that the figure is perched atop of. Yeah, a neat looking figure. You pay a little bit more for Hiya Toy releases versus some of the stuff that you get in the retail stores, if such a thing exists anymore for these smaller scale figures that have this level of posability. At least Hiya Toys is producing it, and like I said, they're producing it really well. Today we were having a look at the new Hiya Toys Injustice 2. This was Swamp Thing. Have you picked up this figure for yourself, or based on this review, let me know down below what you think of Injustice 2 Swamp Thing. Always like reading your comments. Also, while you're at it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on bell notifications. We're going to have a look at some upcoming Hiya toy reviews in upcoming videos. So if this is your fancy, well, the fancy will be fulfilled because we're going to have, like I said, a whole bunch of Hiya toy reviews coming up in the upcoming videos. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.